Where is possible? Past the edge of convention, beyond the boundaries of tomorrow, where no idea is too bold and no challenge too great. It's here where we break free from what is to what could be. Because defining the future is impossible until it's not.
The Association of the U.S. Army is pleased to welcome you to AUSA's Thought Leaders webinar series, a new webinar series featuring military leaders and contemporary military authors. Kicking off today's webinar is AUSA's Vice President of Education, Lieutenant General Guy Swan.
Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to today's AUSA Thought Leaders webinar. While we wish we could all be together here at AUSA, it's currently not possible under today's conditions. So what we've done at AUSA is we've crafted a series of events to bring you senior Army leaders, authors, and other personalities speaking on topics of interest to America's Army, all in a live and virtual forum. We're very glad you joined us today, and we appreciate your support of America's national defense. Joining us today to discuss his new book is Mr. Christian Brose, author of The Kill Chain, Defending America in the Future of High-Tech Warfare. Chris Brose is the head of strategy at Anduril Industries and a senior fellow at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. From 2015 to 2018, he was the staff director for the Senate Armed Services Committee, and in that capacity, he managed the committee's professional staff in support of the chairman, then Senator John McCain, and other majority members in overseeing all of the programs, policies, and resources of the Department of Defense. He was also responsible for leading the production, negotiation, and passage of the National Defense Authorization Acts from 2016 to 2019, which set the policy and authorized spending for all U.S. national defense activities. From 2009 until 2014, he served as the senior policy advisor to Senator McCain, supporting his work on the Senate Armed Services Committee, the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence, and the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. In that capacity, Chris traveled to more than 60 countries during his work in the Senate. From 2008 to 2009, he was the senior editor at Foreign Policy magazine, and prior to that, he served as a policy advisor and chief speechwriter to Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice, and before that, served as a speechwriter to Secretary of State Colin Powell. He's currently also a member of the Aspen Strategy Group. To moderate the question and answer period following Chris's remarks, we couldn't have asked for a better representative than General Retired Bob Brown. General Brown completed his distinguished career in 2019 as the commanding general of U.S. Army Pacific. All told, he has over 18 years of service in the Indo-Pacific region and is well versed in that part of the world, and especially China, which is a central focus of Mr. Brose's book. We're very glad to have General Brown helping us with this today. For those of you who are joining us online, please take advantage of having Mr. Brose here to ask questions. You can use the Q&A tab on the right side of the screen to submit a question. And after Chris talks to us about his book, General Brown will ask him a few questions, and then we'll get to as many of your questions as we possibly can. So Chris, thank you again for coming, and I'll turn the floor over to General Brown to get us started. Gentlemen, thank you very much.
Well, thanks very much, Guy. We are thrilled to have Chris here. And Chris, I will tell you, I really enjoyed the book. Couldn't put it down, especially having just come from the Indo-Pacific. So I think it'd be great to just give you a little bit of time to talk about how you came to write this important book.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And let me just say, I really appreciate you taking the time to do this, and just say at the outset, how important of a role you played at USAR PAC. I remember visiting you out there and A lot of the things that I write about in the book were things that I learned from visits like that, engagements like that with you and other senior leaders of our military. The focus on China, the focus on the Indo-Pacific, the focus on Army modernization is something that you really helped get going and really drive in your time in uniform. And I'm very grateful for you for doing that, for taking the time with me today. What I would say on the book, I get asked a lot why I wrote it. And it's something that I asked myself every day while I was writing it. Why on earth did I take this task on? And really, it was twofold. In the time that I spent in the Senate, better part of 10 years, and especially in the last 4 years that I was there serving as staff director, I was becoming increasingly convinced and increasingly concerned that the U.S. military technological advantage that we've enjoyed for 3 decades was eroding at a startling pace. And that's really, I think, happening for 2 reasons. One is because our adversaries get a vote, and our adversaries have voted. As you know better than anybody, primarily with respect to China, the Chinese military has spent the past 3 decades going to school on the United States military. Really since the end of the first Gulf War, all the way through until the present, they have looked at how we fight, they have taken that apart, and they have tried to play a different game than us. They're not trying to play the same game as we are. And I think increasingly the way that they're focusing on building and fielding their force is designed to call into question all of the traditional advantages that we've had, the way we've thought about projecting military power and the forces that we have used, the traditional types of systems and capabilities that we have used to do that. And I think the thing that became very alarming to me was just the staggering sort of pace that they are on. And really many of the gains that they have made, I think they go far beyond what I think most Americans and even most members of Congress really realize. And again, it's because they're seeking to play a different game that they're increasingly putting the United States in a position of, I think what I say in the book is playing a losing game, where the systematic advantages that we have had are increasingly being called into question by the way that our competitors are fielding their forces, building their forces, specifically to call into question those advantages. At the same time, I think you also have this second disruption, which is happening as a result of technology. And the defense establishment, what Senator McCain used to refer to as the military industrial congressional complex, is a very closed system. There's a belief inside of that system, across it, that things that are developed outside of it somehow have a lesser value. And I think that when you look at the pace that commercial technology has been developing, really in the past 10 to 15 to 20 years or so, you see sort of a staggering degree of improvement and capability with respect to many of these emerging technologies like artificial intelligence and machine learning, autonomous systems, distributed networking, embedded computing, things that I write a lot about in the book. And these technologies, I think, have the possibility of and I think they're already starting to fundamentally change the character of warfare and the way that militaries can build and field military capabilities. Fundamentally, I think this goes far beyond technology, which I say in the book, that ultimately what this presents is really a challenge to the way that we think. And it's something that we're going to have to think our way through because technology is always just a tool. Ultimately, the bigger question is, what do we do with those technologies and capabilities as they emerge now? How do they allow us to operate differently, organize ourselves differently in service of a strategy that gives us competitive advantage in the world? And that's really what I would come back to at the end. I focus around this concept, this organizing idea of the kill chain, which you and probably most of the people on this call are very familiar with. And there's lots of different ways to define it, very technically, very tactically. Because I was trying to focus this book on an educated general audience, I focused it a little bit more simply around the tasks of understanding, decision making, and action. And I think that to me is a really helpful construct as we think about how these technologies can and should change the way that we build military forces and field them and operate them. Ultimately, this is going to accelerate and scale the degree of human understanding, decision making, and action really in an exponential fashion. It's going to accelerate warfare. It's going to scale warfare to a degree that I think we haven't seen in a long time, if ever. And we need to get ahead of this. I do think that we're behind. I think that we have to move with a sense of urgency, and we can talk about what that looks like. But again, I come away from this book feeling optimistic and pessimistic. I'm optimistic by the structural advantages that the United States has in terms of money, technology, people, human capital. Where I end up a bit pessimistic is just that we keep getting in our own way, politically, bureaucratically, in other ways. We need to move with a sense of clarity and urgency to get after this problem, or we will end up being passed and surpassed in a way that I think would make the future quite dangerous for the country. So I'll stop there. Really looking forward to the conversation with you and with the audience, and thank you again for taking the time to do this.
Oh, it's my honor. Hey, Chris, that is a tremendous explanation. And yeah, we have lots of questions we'll take. And I would just say, I think you really hit some critical points there. And that's what throughout the book, you do a tremendous job of describing. And I caught that same pessimistic, but yet optimistic that we can do it if anybody can. But there are some challenges out there. It comes throughout the book. You can see your tremendous experience as staff director of the Senate Armed Services Committee, and obviously policy advisor working with Senator John McCain and all the work you did with him. I wonder if you could describe how that time as staff director in the Senate Armed Services Committee, how that experience informs your assessment of the 2018 National Defense Strategy, because that does come out in the book, very well covered. How did that assist you in that process?
Yeah. So the National Defense Strategy was previously known as the Quadrennial Defense Review. And in the time that I spent as staff director working with Senator McCain, I think we and other members of the committee on a bipartisan basis became very convinced that the QDR had just kind of grown beyond the point of being useful anymore. A lot of that had to do with what Congress had done in terms of just continuing to add new requirements, kind of hanging new ornaments off of that Christmas tree over many, many years, that the requirement for the QDR had just kind of lost the plot. So what we did in the 2017 NDAA was get rid of the requirement for a QDR and replace it with a requirement for the National Defense Strategy. And really the objective that we had was simplifying. We really wanted to simplify the requirement. We really wanted to put the onus on the Secretary of Defense, with his military advisors and other civilian advisors, to develop a strategy that was going to be focused, where real priorities were going to get defined, that was going to set up real choices with real trade-offs programmatically, budgetarily, in terms of posture and other factors. The concern was really that the governing documents of the department had become sort of theories of everything. And too often they were written sort of as bureaucratic exercises where there really weren't sort of clear defined frameworks through which you could make these choices as far as what we needed to do policy-wise, programmatically, budgetarily, and what we were not going to do. And that, I think, was the main thing that we engaged on after the requirement for the NDS was levied, was really engaging with, at the time, Secretary Mattis and his staff around trying to shift the focus of that strategy to great power competition and primarily China. And really having that definition of priority drive the choices and trade-offs that we were going to make kind of downstream, if you will, to really focus on the things that we had to do to compete effectively, and what that meant we were not going to be able to do as much of, so that at a political level, at a senior leader level, those priorities were set, so that the hope would be, the real challenge comes from the implementation of a document like that, where the real rubber meets the road, on what are we going to invest in, what are we going to divest from, what missions is the military going to do, and what missions perhaps should they no longer do. These are senior leader decisions, and what we wanted was, we weren't under the belief that a requirement, a congressional requirement for a strategy was going to solve all of those problems. But the hope was that a better defined requirement and a better strategy could at least provide the clarity that we felt we needed to really define what those priorities were going to look like and the choices we had to make to compete effectively in an era of great power competition. I think the NDS, it's not a perfect document, no document is, But I think it got a lot of those broader frameworks and sort of broader choices right. The challenge, as it always is an implementation, and that's where I think it's still a bit of a mixed picture.
That's great, and getting to China, I think, is key. You mentioned, they're playing a different game at a staggering pace, which I don't think a lot of people are aware of, and you really focus on the narrowing gap in capabilities between the U.S. and its principal rival, China. Could you describe how China's emerging capabilities align asymmetrically against U.S. vulnerabilities? And why should we be concerned? I found a lot of folks, did not seem to be concerned, didn't understand the pace. I think you do a great job of covering that in the book. Can you explain that a little bit, Chris?
Yeah, and I would welcome your thoughts on it. I mean, you live that as close as anybody. The basic thrust of it has been, just when you kind of pull back and look at the scope and breadth of what the Chinese have done, really coming out of the first Gulf War, they made a strategic choice that essentially what the United States military was able to do to Saddam Hussein's Iraq was not something that they wanted the United States to be able to do to China. Not that we had any intention of doing that in 1992, 1993, but that was their concern. And what they did was start systematically building a different kind of military, specifically designed to call into question the advantages that the United States military has relied upon, the traditional assumptions that we have built our force and our way of war around. And if you just kind of look at it, it's been a very deliberate effort. They began building longer range, intermediate range, ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, now increasingly hypersonic weapons, with the goal of being able to target and deny us our warfighting infrastructure, the basing that we enjoy in places like Japan and Guam and elsewhere, really calling into question our ability to operate from those positions of sanctuary that we have traditionally had assumed would be the case. They've built up very dense and very advanced integrated air defense systems to try to push U.S. air power farther and farther away from the Chinese mainland, from Chinese strategic targets. They have built, kind of the broad sensing network from the standpoint of over-the-horizon radars and long-range reconnaissance satellites and other sensing capabilities to be able to identify the carrier, the battle group, aircraft, other means of American power projection, and then seek to overwhelm those assets with, again, large quantities of relatively low-cost anti-ship ballistic missiles, anti-ship cruise missiles, long-range surface-to-air weapons. And then increasingly looking at, what the Chinese refer in their doctrine to as systems destruction warfare, which is a very targeted effort to go after all of that sort of connective tissue and underlying kind of enabling capability that the United States military relies upon to fight, from the standpoint of command and control, the movement of information and intelligence, satellite architectures, mobilization and logistics, being able to target those things through electronic warfare, precision warfare, anti-satellite weapons and other capabilities that we see them rolling out. Again, with a goal of taking away the way that the United States fights. And then everything that we now have seen in recent years of really trying to accelerate that through the integration of advanced technologies such as hypersonic flight, hypersonic weapons, artificial intelligence, autonomous systems of every different kind and every different domain. This, again, is a very systematic effort that has been ongoing for a very long time. It's been methodical, it's been deliberate, and it's been specifically intentioned to deny the United States military the way it operates, which again gets to this question of putting us in a position of playing a losing game, where if we keep doubling down on sort of the ways and means that we have traditionally relied upon as a joint force, we're just going to make that problem worse for ourselves, and the cost of it is increasingly something that we won't be able to bear. So to me, the conclusion is really we have to play a different game. We have to think differently about how we offset these advantages and compete effectively, particularly using these emerging technologies to aid us in that effort.
Very well said. And I would just pile on that, having really over the last 20 years dealt with China closely, I saw a real change in that China used to fear and respect our military strength in the United States. And what I've seen is they don't fear us anymore. They respect us still, but that fear is gone, and there's almost a cockiness with this incredible pace, staggering pace you mentioned, and their effort. And that's concerning, because that could lead to a inadvertent conflict where neither of us would want it, but their lack of fear is a real problem. So very well said. Right. Turning to, you mentioned several times, and I've got a couple of questions on it, on the emerging technologies. You do a great job in the book of talking about the emerging technologies. You do mention very well, technology is a tool and it's people, but there are a lot of folks, and several questions we've gotten there, how emerging technologies such as artificial intelligence and autonomous systems going to change the character of competition and conflict, in your opinion? You cover it in the book very well. What are your thoughts on that, Chris?
Yeah, the way, and this is sort of why I, again, sort of embrace this concept or organizing concept of the kill chain. I think a lot of times when we think about technology, we focus on sort of the means of actions, the ability to field, aircraft that fly a bit farther, missiles that fly a bit farther, perhaps have a slightly better signature. These are all means of action. To me, what is really profoundly significant about these technologies, like artificial intelligence, machine autonomy, is that they're going to transform every phase of that kill chain process. It's not just going to be how we act on the battlefield. It's going to be the character of our understanding of the world, the nature of human decision making, and then obviously also the nature of action in military competitions. So what I try to do in the book, I'm not an engineer. I haven't served in uniform, but I've spent a fair amount of time dealing with both sides. And what I found in my time in the Senate was that a lot of times the folks who are really advanced in building these technologies really don't have an understanding of how the United States military operates, the care with which the military sort of brings new technology into its formations, and just have a very difficult time understanding national defense. And then similarly, the folks in the national defense world are not always at the cutting edge of where these technologies are, where they have, how they have been developed, which again has largely occurred outside in the commercial world. So what I tried to do in the book is sort of think through how will this actually change how we think about and field military forces. And ultimately, what I think we have here is a situation where our force in the future is going to be, as it already is, but just to an exponentially larger degree, collecting and creating vast amounts of data, deploying large quantities of sensors on every soldier, on every system, on every platform, in sort of increasing degrees. And that all of that data is going to have to increasingly be made sense of, sort of structured through non-sort of manual processes, machine learning, computer vision. And that's an area where these technologies are really going to sort of enable human understanding. Because for me, it is fundamentally about the human being at the center of that kill chain process. It is about how these technologies will contribute to and improve and accelerate human understanding of what's happening in military competitions at every level: strategic, operational, tactical, very time-sensitive engagements. It's about facilitating human decision-making, communicating human decision-making, ensuring that command and control is still something that governs how our military operates, how the forces under the command of our senior leaders and human decision makers are following their intent, carrying out what those human beings want done. And then obviously with respect to action, the ability to orchestrate very complex, very sort of large scale, very high speed engagements in very time sensitive ways is something that, again, human beings are going to have to be in control of. But increasingly, they're going to be reliant upon machines to a degree that I think we haven't seen in the past. And again, my concern with this right now is that the way the United States military sort of builds its kill chains, fields those connections between systems, too often than not are very manual, they're very brittle, they're very linear and deliberate. They're not as dynamic as they need to be. They're not as fast as they need to be. They don't scale to the degree that they need to and will need to in the future. And this isn't about taking the human out of that process. It's about bringing enabling technologies into the force that enable human beings to work better, work faster, make better decisions, and ultimately offload a lot of the cognitive burden that our military operators, our soldiers spend way too much of their time dealing with in terms of very manual, very technical, very repetitive tasks that increasingly machines can do better than they can, and thus putting them in the position where they need to be, which is why they join the Army and why they join the military, which is to make better and faster operational and ethical and strategic decisions to command. That, I think, is the way, hopefully, the relationship between our humans in uniform and the technologies that we're fielding will play out. But I think, as I see, from one of the questioners, our adversaries don't always share the same values and look at the problem the same way. And that's certainly something that I address in the book, and we can talk more about today.
Yeah, no, that's and another follow-on question that you hit it very well. We're going to have to rely on that autonomous and AI-enabled capabilities. How do you think decision makers gain trust in the deployment of those systems? I think that you touch it in the book pretty well, but I think it'd be great. Our listeners, a couple of questions on that. It'd be good for them to hear your thoughts on that.
I think that's a central point, and I think that it's not as new and sort of mystifying as we often make it out to be. I say in the book, that a lot of times in the defense world we talk about the relationship between humans and machines as human-machine teaming, and I really dislike the term teaming, because to me it suggests that there's a relationship of equality between humans and machines, which I fundamentally disagree with. But I think the better way to think about it is really the sort of traditional military understanding of command and control, where you have a superior actor in command of subordinate actors, whether those actors are humans or machines. I think the way that our military has fielded technologies to date, the way we put human beings into life-threatening, life and death kinds of situations in military competition, fundamentally flows through a process of training those people or machines rigorously, testing them consistently to ensure that the things they have been trained to do, they actually can do effectively, repetitively, consistently, predictably. And then through that process of training and testing, commanders build trust in their subordinates, whether those subordinates are people, or increasingly might be autonomous systems or intelligent programs that are performing military functions that today are being performed by human operators. But I don't think the fundamental framework is going to change. And I really kind of reject, what I find a lot of times is this sort of notion that these technologies are just so new and so unprecedented that all of the sort of laws and policies and practices and habits that we have built up and sort of built with great care for many, many decades around how we govern the use of violence in war, how we govern sort of the delegation of military tasks from superior actors to subordinate actors. I don't think that radically needs to change. I do think what will be different here is that increasingly the trust that we're going to be putting as senior leaders, as military commanders, that is going to be trust that we are putting into machines to do things that we have, again, trained them to do, tested them to do, and hopefully over time have built up trust that we understand the capabilities and limitations of those things, and we're not going to put those systems into a position or hand them over to soldiers or members of the joint force to do things that we have not trained them and tested them to do. Which again, I think is exactly how we approach technology, weapons, and capabilities, today and have for a very long time. And I actually think that framework is going to be very helpful for us in thinking about and governing the kind of the control of these technologies as they're fielded for military use in the future.
No, I think you're spot on, Chris, and your emphasis on trust. It all starts with trust, no doubt about it. And very well said. Several people have asked if you could give an example of a kill chain and what insights does it provide Department of Defense as we're developing, refining warfighting concepts like all domain operations and the Army's multi-domain operations. So if you could give an example, I think that'd be helpful to some of our viewers. That'd be great.
Yeah, so I'll give an example. I would just say two things kind of preliminarily. I think the thing that I would try to get away from, and I think a lot of times the way we have talked about kill chains in the past, because again, this isn't a new concept, and I would just underscore that a lot of what I say in the book is not sort of revolutionary and brand new. It's actually, in many cases, things that we have, a lot of us have been saying for a long period of time. My concern with how we've built kill chains in recent decades is that they tend to be very linear. A sensor connects to a command node, and that command node connects to a shooter, but they aren't recomposable. It is a very linear process where information is collected, it's transmitted in one way, but if any link in that process gets severed or broken, the whole thing collapses. What I try to say in the book and move to is more of an understanding of the enabling of sort of architectures and networking. What I call in the book is sort of a military Internet of Things, building off of the technologies that have been fielded in the commercial world and the way that they have sort of driven open interfaces, extensibility of the systems that they're fielding in the commercial world, which is why I can do this webinar on a Google application on a Mac book, running Windows in the background. It's because even though those are built by different vendors, the interfaces are open and data can move in and out of different applications. So when I talk about kill chains in the book, it's really around enabling the sort of underlying technologies, particularly these emerging technologies, so that as I think the department is recognizing, and you see senior leaders, especially in the Army, talking about that any sensor can communicate data through any command node to any shooter or the best shooter to take an action. And again, we sort of refer to action as shooting, but I think what we're really talking about is carrying out human action, whatever that may be. So just a recent example is a demonstration that I read about in the press, where it appears that the Army has been able to use overhead imagery to do target identification, pass information to a long range weapon. I forget whether it was a HIMARS or something like that, and then cue that system to take a shot. So now you have sensing occurring in one domain, cueing fires from another domain, something at the strategic level, cueing something at the tactical level. But what I would say is that I think increasingly we have to be able to do this out at the tactical edge. I think that particularly going back to the conversation we had around the way China is building its military, we have built battle networks that are overly centralized, overly consolidated around very large, very vulnerable network hubs. Whether those are division headquarters or air operations centers or data centers or clouds, those are going to be very enticing targets for an adversary. We have to get away from the sort of hub and spoke model of building battle networks and push a lot of that network function out to the tactical edge, where these systems are going to have to be able to collect information, make sense of information, move information dynamically to people and things that need it, and then enable those human beings to direct actions, again, all out at the tactical edge, oftentimes, divorced from, kind of a rear echelon or command element, and really doing this under more of a, kind of an old mission command type approach. And that's something that I think, these technologies, these kind of emerging technologies are going to lend themselves to very well. I think these are problems that we can address today with technology that exists today, which is, I think, going to allow the sort of construction of much more autonomous, much more dynamic, much more sort of mesh networked and kind of recomposable kill chains, which is, I think, what senior leaders are getting at when they talk about things like joint all-domain command and control, multi-domain operations. It's that optionality and flexibility that gives a commander, the ability to really kind of put the force together in new and creative ways, and operate at a scale and at a speed that really just shatters the ability of an adversary to make decisions and keep up. So I think ultimately that's where these technologies are really going to shine through that process of understanding decision-making and action.
Yeah, and there's some folks would argue, and I've heard the argument, well, the United States is the most joint force in the world. But what you're saying, it's not joint enough. It's too slow. It's too stovepiped. And you mentioned, I think it's exactly right. It has to be sensor agnostic, platform agnostic to give you more choices. You're really moving from a joint interdependence. You're dependent on each other to a joint integration where you're more integrated. So we have to get even more joint.
Yes.
And your military Internet of Things addresses that, which leads me to one of the challenges in this area. That's going to require an acquisition system that can adapt pretty quickly. And so you are a little bit critical of the current military's acquisition system, a little bit too linear, not timely enough. Certainly, we've all seen that. What do you think of initiatives like the Army stand-up of U.S. Army Joint Futures Command and activities happening in acquisition? Think we can get there, and will the defense budget process support this? Tough questions there.
Yeah,
the softballs are gone. Then we get to the tough ones here.
And it's a great question, and I think it really does come down. I mean, a lot of this comes down to implementation. I think what you hit on is exactly right. I mean, there's a lot of good things happening right now, from Futures Command in the Army to a lot of these innovation organizations that are proliferating, like the Defense Innovation Unit, AFWorks, NavalX, other things like that. I think that's very good. I think it's encouraging. I think it's solving a part of the problem, which is creating more options for new entrants, companies or individuals, others who have new technologies, new capabilities to get access to the Department of Defense, to better understand military problems and to bring solutions in that have traditionally not been part of the defense ecosystem. I think that's good. I think the big problem now is arguably what it always has been, which is how do you get those early stage technologies, those encouraging prototypes, those encouraging capabilities scaled and fielded quickly into military programs of record deployed across the force? How do you get them across the valley of death? I think that's been the major problem for the past 30 years. I think that still is the major problem. And I don't see that problem being addressed in the same way, in the sense that, I see a lot of organizations that are focused on bringing those new entrants in, starting those small programs, getting those small companies a very initial contract to get going. I think the thing that really needs to happen is there needs to be more of a focus at a senior leader level, at a kind of modernization organization level, of structuring competitions and structuring processes that allow senior leaders, commanders, and decision makers to identify what are the best in breed new capabilities that are out there, and pull those very quickly across the valley of death and scale them quickly. That's something that I do not see being addressed as well as it could be today. My hope is that is a failing that we will get after in the coming weeks, months, years, because that has been the traditional problem. And to your point about the acquisition system, I spent a lot of time in Congress writing a lot of acquisition legislation and acquisition reform, and maybe it helped, maybe it hurt more than it helped. I think that basically the conclusion I've come to is that the Department of Defense has every acquisition authority it needs to do pretty much everything that it wants. Often it comes down to senior leaders, the willingness to use those authorities, and the flexibility of funding to support big moves when those moves are possible, kind of inside the current year of execution, having the flexibility of funding so that when a new technology proves that it has a superior capability or something superior to offer the joint force over other new technologies or over other current legacy programs of record, the ability to scale that and scale it quickly is something that I think the department struggles with. I don't think the Congress has made it easier for them. I think in many cases, the Congress has made it harder and made the problem worse. And I think this is something that we really need to figure out as a country, or we will fall behind. And I think the ability to take more programs of record and open them up, make them things that are competed more regularly, not competed in the sense that you're going to award contracts on the basis of white papers and PowerPoint presentations, but really taking out the best capabilities that you have to date at that time, flying them off, shooting them off, baking them off, whatever you want to call it, and determining really who's got real capability and who doesn't, and having those real world demonstrations, tests, evaluations drive more sort of programmatic and budgetary decisions, in the next year, so that it's something where we can start turning a lot faster, we can start scaling new capabilities a lot faster, and ultimately getting them into the hands of soldiers and operators so that they can start to determine what their requirements really are and how they want to use these new technologies to operate differently and organize themselves differently. Because I think ultimately that's going to be the main question or the main factor that will differentiate us from our competitors, which is, what will those talented Americans in uniform do with those new technologies that no one from the requirements process, the JROC, the acquisition system, or Congress is going to be able to figure out, as well as those Americans in uniform who are going to come up with new ideas for how to use those technologies to do things that nobody has yet predicted. We have to create conditions and incentives where that happens more routinely and is rewarded and scaled, rather than something that becomes the exception to the rule.
Oh, that's well, you can really see your tremendous experience with Senator McCain and on the Senate Armed Services Committee. Just why the book is so impressive, your knowledge. Got a great question from Jeffrey A. and I think it ties right into what we were just discussing. The service is still relevant. I've heard a lot of people question that. Is it an industrial age structure that needs to be relooked at? And you touched on a little bit of that there. What are your thoughts on that, Chris?
It's a great question, and I'll wade into the controversy. Let me just say this. I don't think anybody can sort of, predicate their, recommendations for change or military reform on the assumption that the United States military services are somehow going to go away or fundamentally change their organization. That being said, I guess what I would say is I find it interesting that all of the concepts, operational concepts, kind of other concepts that are being rolled out of the department today, joint all-domain command and control, multi-domain operations, they're all predicated on closing the gaps between domains. The way I think about it is that if you look at the world through the lens of software, because a lot of these are going to be software-defined capabilities from the standpoint of data management, battle management, command and control, effects integration, how you accelerate kill chains. These are going to be software-defined technologies that really drive that. Those technologies are going to be agnostic, as you mentioned earlier, to sensors, platforms, domains, effects, radios. It is purely, if you look at the world through the lens of software and data, it's just a question of how do you move information from where it is, turn it into understanding, and get that information to where it needs to be so that you can take effective actions. That is a process, and those are capabilities that don't see the world in terms of domains. They don't see the world in terms of geography, and they certainly don't respect the sort of traditional divisions between military services that are largely built around geographic domains. I think that is going to be, a seminal challenge for the Department of Defense. Does it require the military services to fundamentally go away and we organize the department and the defense enterprise around an entirely new, kind of construct? I don't know, and I'm also not assuming that that's going to happen. I think we have to kind of work through the system that we have today, try to make this work as well as we possibly can, while at the same time recognizing that the thing that we are saying right now, almost in unison, is most important, is trying to close the gaps between services, domains, and other things like that. Which is why, I leave it to, the Secretary of Defense, the next Secretary of Defense, as to how that is going to have to play out, because I think it's a huge challenge. And I think that we are too often set up to generate ideas and approaches to problems that really aren't the ones that are going to be most effective based on the problems we have and the sort of technology and opportunities that we have to approach those problems differently.
Oh, thanks. Well, I think we're the last question, and boy, we could just continue this for hours. I'm really enjoying it, and I know our viewers are as well, because there's tremendous knowledge. But I think the last question I want to ask you: what surprised you most in writing the book? Give you a chance there.
Yeah, so a lot surprised me. I'd say the major thing that surprised me was, one thing that you don't really get a lot of time to do in government, and I imagine you've had this experience as well, is really kind of step back from the crush of your day-to-day business, the sort of tyranny of the inbox, and really kind of step back and reflect on sort of where we've been and where we're going. And I had a bit of an opportunity to do that in the course of writing this book. I had an opportunity to go back and read and reread a lot of the things that have been said over the past 3 decades about how we should be thinking about these, fundamental changes in technology and warfighting that are occurring, the nature of military competition, the rise of China. And I'll tell you, I say it in the book, what was most surprising to me is how consistently we have been saying the same things. So by way of an example, if you go back and read the Military Technical Revolution, which was written by the Office of Net Assessment right after the end of the First Gulf War and the end of the Cold War, and you put that document next to the National Defense Strategy, which came, the better part of 3 decades later, it is remarkable how comparable they are. How long back, we were seeing the need for these kinds of more dynamic and accelerated kill chains, the significance of, the proliferation of precision strike warfare and what that was going to mean, the kinds of capabilities that adversaries were likely going to start building and fielding to offset America's traditional advantages, the kinds of military systems that were going to be more relevant and less relevant to future military advantage, and all the different concepts that have been rolled out throughout the years from, certainly things like, the revolution in military affairs and network-centric warfare and Army After Next, and these many attempts that we've had to fundamentally change the way we think about and build and operate and organize our military. They're remarkably similar. And in that respect, I find my contribution to this in many respects is sort of reminding us of all the things we've been saying for a very long time and too often failing to do as much or as fast as I think that we should, which I think also sort of brings up, kind of an interesting question unto itself, which is, if there's been this degree of convergence and sort of understanding of how we should be thinking about the future, why have we ended up in a position where I would argue that we are so sort of poorly prepared for it? And there are a lot of reasons for that. But again, to your question, what most surprised me is how little of this is actually new. The technologies are certainly new. How we can think about building concepts and organizations around those technologies to operate differently, much of that may be new too. But it builds on a significant amount of thinking that's been done over the past 30 years that is remarkable in how much it rhymes. I'll just put it that way. So I would just kind of leave that as a thought that as yet again we're now talking about JADC2 and MDO and great power competition and things like that. We need to be mindful that they don't become sort of the newest buzzwords that we sort of talk about effectively. We talk a big game around, but then the apparatus, the bureaucracy, the implementation of that continues to lag and drag us down. So I think the focus on this is really going to need to be in the implementation of what are ideas that are not as new as I think many people think that they are.
Chris, thanks so much for joining us today. Thanks for the book. It's very timely.
I appreciate
tremendous book, The Kill Chain. I would highly recommend it. I also want to thank you on behalf of so many soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, Coast Guardsmen for your incredible service. Thanks. And all you did. Senate Armed Services Committee, your hard work made a huge difference. I can tell you that. I saw it every day, and we're grateful for that. So thanks for joining us today. Great discussion. And again, I tell you, I'd highly recommend this book. I think its timing is perfect. And I look forward to talking to you more about it. And as I said, really appreciate you being with us today.
Right. General Brown, thank you. Thank you for today, and thank you for being senior fellow with us here at AUSA. And let me add my thanks to Chris Brose. I went through the book in detail. It is fascinating, and you've really made a major contribution here. Now, will we listen to what you've said? I think that's the real question right now. Are we going to listen and take action? And I hope we will, because you've really laid this out well for us. So thank you, Chris, for the book, for your contribution today. And from an AUSA perspective, thank you for always being open to us when we came to visit with you at the Armed Services Committee in our role of supporting the Army's role in national defense. So, gentlemen, again, thank you very much. Before we depart today, I'd like to remind our audience that we have a number of upcoming events that may be of interest. One area that Mr. Brose doesn't get much into in the book is the issue of talent management. And I would suggest that one of the strengths of the U.S. military and other Western forces are our people. And on Thursday, this week, the 13th of August, on the AUSA Noon Report, we'll be featuring the director of the Army Talent Management Task Force, Major General J.P. McGee, who will be talking about what's happening in the U.S. Army in the area of talent management. And then on the 31st of August, another AUSA Noon Report with another crowd pleaser, the Sergeant Major of the Army, Michael Grinston, will be our guest for that event as well. We've got a lot of great speakers, and I hope you can join us for more of these events throughout the summer and into the fall. It's easy to register for these events at the AUSA website at ausa.org. And finally, let me thank all of you that are members of AUSA. And for those that are not yet members, we could certainly appreciate you joining us as we all work together to support the U.S. Army's role in national defense. So again, thank you, everybody. Please stay safe and have a great Army Day. Thank you.